Um, okay, so it's 7 o'clock. And I think we have a fair amount to cover. Claudia, do you want to do the honors of kicking us off here?
Flag of the United States of
Allegiance.
America and to the republic for which it
Which it
stands,
stands,
one nation,
under God,
Under God.
indivisible.
with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Okay.
Hope everybody heard that.
Super. So it's I guess Wednesday, June 29th, and we have been at this for a while, and it is I think an evening that I know all of us on the committee have been looking forward to, and that is one in which we start to talk about recommendations to the town board. To refresh everybody's memory, we were put together by the town board last summer. We did some public forums in the early fall. We engaged Nan and Michael and team in the height of fall, and together developed a program in which we did focus groups in around Thanksgiving. We did an open house in the sort of the height of winter, and used that to develop a survey which went out in the early spring, and all the while Nan and Michael were working on some of the economic reports, the mapping reports that we have been circulating. And based off of all of that, we asked Nan and Michael to make us some recommendations. We have received a draft of those recommendations. All of the members of the CPRC have had a chance to read that draft and have been encouraged to give comments to Nan directly, which Nan has turned. And so in the last 24 hours, we got a turned version. And so tonight, what I propose is the following agenda, in which Nan and Michael share with us these proposals formally, and we then have a chance to talk about these proposals on a macro level, ask questions, provide comments, have discussion as a committee, see if we can't agree on the substance of the macro proposals. Then the next piece, if we were so able, is if there's any wordsmithing on the document, which looks a little bit like this. I would recommend we do a little bit of wordsmithing if people have any. And then we would conclude with a discussion around next steps. So that's what I'm thinking about for the agenda. Unless anybody has any objections, I would hand it over to Nan. Does everybody feel pretty good about that as an agenda? I'm getting thumbs up all the way around. Good, love it. Nan, you have the con.
Okay, thanks. I'm not sure you want to trust me with that. But no, I think what I'd like to do is kind of a two-parter here. I'm going to ask Michael to just a global overview of the pieces that are in the document, just to refamiliarize everybody what the pieces are, how they all fit together. And then when he's done with that, I'll circle back and try and give a summary of the major recommendations. And then we can go from there. So Michael, I'll let you take the con now and kind of give us an overview of what's in the report.
Certainly. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. And it looks like you can see my screen. One of these days, I wish Zoom would change it so I can see what you're seeing. So this is a copy of the report, the June 28th draft that we just shared with the committee. I'm just going to sort of give everybody an overview of what's in that. That's essentially broken down into two parts. Part one is essentially the data report that many of you have already seen, and it's been slightly updated. It basically gives an overview of what the overall charge of the committee was and what our goals were, as well as, sorry, I'm just going to try and enable my mouse pointer here, as well as an overview of what the planning process was that we have gone through over the past almost 1 year. And then the findings, much of that was already included in the data report that we submitted, I guess, last month. But what is different now is we've now added part two, which includes the individual recommendations, which we're going to go over tonight. And then sort of the third part of the document is the various appendices that include the more detailed work that we underwent as the course of this went on. So just giving everybody an overview here. As I mentioned, most of this first part is largely the same as the data report that we submitted, but I have highlighted in yellow some new changes and additions we've made since that. For example, we have the consulting team charge here, which was basically trying to describe the mission of what we were set out to accomplish. I changed this area here to reflect the fact that this is now not just the data report, it's now the full report with recommendations. And the second item that we did here is we moved the definition of hospitality uses from the body of the report up here, because we felt it was more suitable up here in the sort of the mission statement, if you will, of what we were trying to accomplish. So we've moved that up here because it doesn't really apply to specific zoning changes that we're recommending. And I'll explain, or we can explain that in a little bit. We then begin to explain sort of the process that we went through that Tim already sort of described. We started out with the focus groups, and then we had the open house meeting, and then we had the survey, and all the different steps that we took along the way are outlined here. And then start to get into the findings. Each of these findings areas, oftentimes they're the bulk of the work is included in the appendices. We're just providing the sort of the overview of that here. So these are essentially our findings and notes on our review of the current comprehensive plan, which was adopted in 2015, and then a review of the existing zoning that took place. And this gets into all the different zoning elements that are involved, as well as we provided. Most of these maps are in the appendices. We've included a few here just for easy reference. This one being the zoning map for the town. And then as we get to this next area, before we finish up the zoning, one of the things we just added here in this yellow text here is we felt that it was necessary to better describe this current situation with the aquifer protection overlay, because the town has an aquifer protection overlay, and the village of Millbrook has essentially a very similar tool, which is governed under state law that governs the watershed that feeds the aquifer. And these two things aren't exactly the same. And we wanted to kind of point that out, because we feel that this could cause some confusion, and we're tying it back to a recommendation you'll see later about trying to simplify those two things and make them coincide, if you will. We then get into the description of the focus group meetings, which the notes are provided in the appendices. The open house meeting, again, all the details and notes from that are in the appendix. Then the townwide survey, giving an overview of the survey process and what we discovered, what our findings were from that. All of the details of that are also in the appendix. Then an assessment of the current and potential future lodging facilities in the greater area around Dutchess County, which is now mapped here in this graphic that's showing existing ones that we know of, as well as potential future ones that are apparently at some form of permitting process or design. We also included a trend analysis of hospitality in the area. That full report is provided in the appendix. This gives us an overview of what the findings were from that, as well as an estimation of what the economic impacts would be from some of these hospitality venues, and using a specific model which we developed that was based on some of the results we got from the survey. Basically tried to run a model simulation of what would be the potential economic benefit from one venue that matched about approximately the size of a hospitality venue that folks identified as being acceptable in the town of Washington. We then also added a section here that related to our earlier work at looking at what the sort of current fiscal condition of the town was, in specific related to the New York State Comptroller's fiscal health analysis that they conduct on various municipalities around the state, looking for any warning signs or dangers of there being any financial stress for the municipality, or early warning signs, if you will, of any potential stress that the community might be having as far as economic problems. That was outlined here. We and didn't find any indication of any financial stress. We then begin to explain how we started to map the various natural resources of the town and overlay those into a series of layers, if you will, to see where there were areas that had the most overlap of sensitive natural areas versus areas which had the least, with the idea of it being used as a sort of a first pass at what areas would we want to avoid from a development standpoint, because there are a lot of natural resources in those areas, and what areas might we be more prone to steer development toward because there's less natural resources in those areas that are potentially threatened. We also included some of the existing traffic volumes and a look at the view sheds and buildable land for the area, and describing that. Again, a lot of these are just the sort of the summary of our findings. The bulk of a lot of this work is provided in the appendix, but because the appendix is rather large, we kind of wanted to sort of set that aside. And so that whole part one basically outlines all of our findings, if you will, that sort of set the stage for, okay, now here are the recommendations based on what we've learned going through this process. And so we start part two with the recommendation stage, which we felt would be useful to sort of have a summary statement, if you will, that just kind of captured it in a nutshell, because as you get into the recommendation section, there's a lot of very specific and in some cases detailed recommendations. So we felt it was helpful to just try and boil it down into a statement, if you will. And I don't know, Nan, if you wanted me to go through that, or you want to step in here and go through the recommendation or the summary.
Yeah, well, let me step in here. And I think that maybe if you go to the figure 7, the summary of recommendations.
Oh, sure.
That might be just a place to start. So I guess overall, as you saw in the draft, and that some of you commented on individually, that the 2015 comprehensive plan clearly sets a direction that the community worked towards in 2015. And there was nothing, in our opinion, that we heard from the community that indicated that there was a drastic global change in direction that the community wanted to move in towards. So the one question that the town board asked us is, should the comprehensive plan be amended? And it's our opinion that we really need to look at that the comprehensive plan, the vision, the goals, and the direction, I think has been, through our public engagement, has been reaffirmed. There hasn't been any, from a public input point of view, significant change there. But the 2015 plan did not address hospitality. It did, it was broader. It has some statements in there about recognizing tourism, but there's really nothing in the 2015 plan that answers the questions that the town board charged us with examining. And so our, kind of primary recommendation is that we really feel that this effort reaffirmed the 2015 plan, but that in essence, the work that we did with the public engagement, the data collection, the mapping, and all of the analysis and work that we did is really part of what you would normally do for a comprehensive plan update. So we feel that the outlook on answering the town board's question is really not to amend the plan. We're not recommending amending the direction that plan set for the community, but we are recommending that that an updated plan be done to at the very least, to recognize the significant community planning effort that we just did over the last year, and to memorialize the information that we've learned and the direction that the community said, and the information that we learned from the maps and the data should be part and should be memorialized into an updated comprehensive plan. And so at the very least, the plan, since this is a planning effort, it's a community-wide planning effort. So our first recommendation is really that the comprehensive plan should reflect this work. It should include these appendices, and it should work to answer the question about what the community wants to do related to hospitality. Because if we don't answer it in the comprehensive plan, then it will remain unanswered as time goes on in the future. And I think that what you work towards is to come up with some answers and some direction, and that ought to be memorialized in an updated plan. So our recommendations that follow this kind of first one here, to update the plan to include this hospitality study as in it. Everything else really that comes, all of the other recommendations, of which, as you can see, there are many details. They're all in the context of what the comprehensive plan, how the comprehensive plan should be updated to address hospitality. So we add specific things in, like the comprehensive plan should be sure and include the necessary terminology regarding inns and short-term rentals and the word hospitality. And we have we've had discussions at the committee level and both internally on our team about that definition of hospitality. And as Michael said, we moved that definition of hospitality to the beginning because it is the definition of what we use throughout this planning process to say, this is what we're studying. We looked at a range of potential hospitality uses to ask the community about and evaluate whether they're appropriate or not. That's what this study was all about. The outcome of that is that some of those uses that we started off studying are not recommended to be moved forward and are really, and you'll see in the recommendations, are not part of the policy. We're not recommending them to be part of the policies and the direction specifically for hospitality moving forward. So I just wanted to clarify why that was moved forward in the way it was. So we feel that the current comprehensive plan is quite, it's got a lot of information in it, and by adding in the terminology, we'll clarify from this point forward. If the town board ultimately chooses to update the plan, we'll define what we all mean by those terms. We feel that while the comprehensive plan was not a joint plan, meaning it wasn't adopted by the village of Millbrook, it was a town plan, but there's a significant component of the town's plan related to the village. And also, given that the work that we all did together shows a strong desire on the community to continue focusing commercial development in Millbrook, and that there's a very close tie between that being maintained as the center kind of hub of the community, that there really needs to be ongoing coordination with the village and the town related to promoting ways that the village could evaluate their plans and their zoning and land use regulations to evaluate how can the village be the place that accommodates the kind of hospitality that the community is looking to focus in the village. So there's a role, and I think a significant coordination with the village that would benefit this whole question, since the village has been part of the plan, and certainly from a community input point of view remains a significant part of where you want to see things go. So if you look at the existing plan, it starts off with a vision, it has goals, and it has policies. So in addition to updating the plan with this information that we've uncovered and evaluated, we also feel like there needs to be a goal in the plan that articulates and establishes the direction for hospitality, that reflects the community input that we've received, that addresses the size, the intensity, the architectural scale, and appropriate locations for hospitality uses. I really feel strongly that you have very specific articulated goals and policies for other topics in the town, such as, focusing development in the village and not extending infrastructure and public infrastructure out of the village. I think you need to answer the question about hospitality by having an updated goal that specifically addresses this. The big, one big recommendation is the question of, where, do we need hospitality? Where do we want hospitality, and how big? And while there were certainly some people who don't want hospitality at all in the town, globally looking at all of our public engagement, there was a need that was identified for hospitality uses, but not all hospitality uses and not in all areas. And so we're recommending the creation of called an overlay district, which your zoning already includes. You have an aquifer protection overlay, you have an agricultural overlay, you have an environmental overlay, and basically an overlay district simply sets the rules for some specific area for some specific kind of use. And so we're recommending 2 locations be considered for an overlay, one in the Washington Hollow area and one we haven't mapped it, but in appropriate locations outside the village that do not have the aquifer and other environmental sensitivities, that there could be locations outside the village that could be appropriate for hospitality uses. That was certainly showed up in our open house and the survey. And that these be, again, not just any kind of hospitality, but we're looking at small scale. We're looking at 20 rooms in general or less, although I'm going to get into that a little bit in a minute. The 20 rooms was felt to be the kind of tipping point between where the community felt 20 and less were appropriate. And then the higher you got over 20 rooms globally, broadly over the town was much less, considered much less appropriate. So the big end of this particular recommendation is that this does not include recommending large scale resorts and retreats and similarly intensive hospitality uses outside of these areas. So if you ended up having the Washington Hollow and some area outside the village that would allow for inns that would be defined with size limitations. The other place that currently allows hotels and motels is in Mabbittsville. And we feel that the current situation that hotels and motels in Mabbittsville are relatively undefined. There are no development standards, there's no size limits, there's really nothing in the zoning that would, other than that density has to be connected to residential development. There's very little in Mabbittsville that would help the town ensure that the goals for that mixed use district were going to be met. So we're recommending that the comprehensive plan establish a policy to actually remove hotel and motel uses in Mabbittsville and replace it with the inn. So we're not necessarily saying there should be no hospitality uses there, but they should be all oriented to this inn kind of definition. And by the way, an inn is what the village of Millbrook uses, and they also currently limit them to 20 rooms. So within this overlay, or these proposed overlays, an inn would be allowed as a special use permit that would go through the planning board and have to meet all of the site plan and the special use permit criteria that addresses all of the other architectural, environmental, and other performance standards that are quite well stated already. I think one of the comments that the committee members sent along were that related to the 20 rooms, and is that a drop dead kind of number, and should it be 20 rooms in all 3 of those locations? That would be the 2 overlays and Mabbittsville. And I think the feeling that that I got was that there needed to be more fine-tuned than just a flat 20 room. So you'll see in the recommendations that we've offered a couple options of how you can tailor this so that we don't, because I don't think there's a lot of support for, large hospitality uses, unlimited, but to allow some flexibility. And so we've introduced the idea within these overlay areas that, and in Mabbittsville, that as part of a comprehensive plan update, we look at those areas and allow for some flexibility that maybe in Mabbittsville, if because of size, parcel size, location, and potentially aquifer, that maybe it would need to be smaller than 20. In Washington Hollow, that has a totally different situation with highway access and different kinds of situations and different kinds of commercial uses going on there already, that it would be appropriate to have more than 20. So we've offered a couple options on how you could approach fine tuning those 3 areas, and also introduce the idea of using incentives to incentivize hospitality in those areas. Again, not everywhere, just specifically to those overlay areas where it's kind of like the applicant or the developer offers some desired amenity to the town, and in return, they get additional density of rooms. So we've included in the recommendation a consideration for the town to think about, can you incentivize, for instance, use of renewable energy, reuse of existing buildings, providing electric vehicle charging stations, opening up land for public access. There's a whole list of things that could be provided to the town in return for additional rooms that would go to some set percentage, no more than X percent more above the 20 rooms. So the 20 is kind of, again, that tipping point. We feel so, you know, I think there's quite a bit in your zoning code now for related to architectural design standards, but you don't actually have any architectural design standards. It's kind of relegated to, well, you know, an architect could weigh in that's familiar with the area, and they could weigh in on what's appropriate. There's a lot of language here and there in the zoning law relating to how new uses architecturally fit into the community. But when we did our public engagement, that was really important. People really wanted to make sure these things fit into the community. And so we really feel that following up on the 2015 comprehensive plan, that rather than leaving the decision about whether something is architecturally compatible with the town to an architect or an applicant to argue their point, that the town should establish its own idea of what its own architectural compatibility is and follow through on that original recommendation. It's actually memorialized in the comprehensive comprehensive plan and in the zoning. And so we're kind of reiterating the need for the town to have its own set of architectural and site design standards that, you know, nowadays we do illustrated ones so that people can actually see pictures of what we mean by architectural compatibility. So there's quite a few separate recommendations relating on how to tighten that up and how to make sure new uses meet the desires of the community. We're recommending to continue the use of bed and breakfast, which are allowed pretty much everywhere in town, with the current definition, and keeping that because that's a small hospitality venue that meets some of the need that the community has identified. One of the things that's not hospitality related directly, but is indirectly, is because everything we heard from the 2015 plan and the input that we got as part of this process was that Washington really is very environmentally aware of its natural resources. You highly value them. They're important, and that we really feel that We have given you a lot of new maps of what those resources are and where they are. But we really feel that a natural resource inventory that would take some of the information that we have, plus the habitat summary that you have, into and have that as a more of a adopted part of the comprehensive plan, because all of the decisions that are made are circle back to, are they environmentally appropriate for that particular parcel? So I think that that would be a tool that would be very useful for you to have. We also were, we looked at how folks feel about short-term rental regulations and what, if anything, should be done with that. And we're recommending that the town does go ahead and identify regulations for short-term rentals. I think the public input that we got was pretty specific about the kinds of things that people were looking for in terms of having a registration system, and a structured complaint system so that people could feel confident if there was a problem, they could have their complaint looked at, and if there were too many violations, that people's ability to continue with short-term rentals could be addressed. And then we've added in the notion that we know that in many places, short-term rentals can have unintended consequences in other areas of the community. One of which is, in some places, they're significantly affecting the ability for people to find long-term rentals or other kinds of housing. And so while it doesn't seem to be either desired or the need now, we're recommending to kind of keep on the radar that the town should be monitoring the situation carefully, and that there might be a need to consider other kinds of limitations. Some communities are doing caps. Some communities are doing oriented towards owner-occupied short-term rentals. We're not recommending those to be incorporated right now, but to be considered and be on the radar for the future. As Michael pointed out, I think we both think that there's some coordination between the town and the village for getting the aquifer protection coordinated, especially related to the maps. And this next one here is, right now you have an environmental protection overlay in your zoning. It's quite, I think it's quite well done. But the problem is it's not activated yet because it hasn't been mapped. So it's really there in the zoning, ready to be used, but it's not, you don't have that actual environmental protection area map. And so there's a recommendation in there to actually follow through and map that. We feel that between what we've given you and your a natural resource inventory that you may do, you have plenty of information to identify sensitive areas that should be in that environmental protection overlay. The next one is really, there's a lot of really good stuff still in the 2015 comprehensive plan that haven't been fully implemented. And it's always, when we do a comprehensive plan, there's kind of this collective sigh of relief in the community. Phew, we got through that project. It's done. It's great. Wow, we did it. And then it's hard to actually implement those policies and those actions. So it's time to pull that out and look at the things that have gone unimplemented and start getting them to work for the community to meet your goals and your vision that are laid out. And then the last thing on this summary is certainly there was public support and from a planning perspective, the reuse of existing structures is always, where feasible, always a really good thing to do. And so we have added in some ideas on, there's ways of incentivizing reuse of existing buildings. And again, this is relating to hospitality basically in those 3 areas, not everywhere. So I think the summary of all of this is we do feel that the comprehensive plan would benefit by incorporating all of this new information and this new public input. We do feel there's opportunities from appropriately sized hospitality uses in very select locations. We feel that there's, you know, a lot of environmental sensitivities in the town that would that support limiting those locations. So I feel like I could go on and on about all of these things, but that hopefully is a summary overview of what's in here. And before I turn it back over to the committee, Michael Allen, did I miss anything of great importance that we need to talk about?
No, I think you captured it, Nan. I just wanted to make sure that a couple of things that, you know, as far as the, you know, looking ahead to the Airbnbs, that was really because, you know, longer term, we want to make sure that we're not totally undermining a viable long-term rental market, because folks need to be able to rent houses long-term too. So that's all.
Okay. So Tim, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, so for folks who are on the call who've not seen the document, Nan just gave a very good summary of what is essentially a 24-page document, and which is highly formatted by Nan and Michael, and so it's a dense document, and that's before all the appendices, which make it a ginormous document. Not an easy task. I think one of the what I'd like to do now is invite the committee to have some discussion about these recommendations and how they feel about them, what they're parsing through about them, and the macro recommendations or observations that I've written down are: number one, the committee's work essentially reaffirms the 2015 comprehensive plan. Number two, that the committee would recommend that we update the plan to actually allow for a clear definition of hospitality. Number three, that the committee would recommend that definition of hospitality be inns, and that the committee would recommend being inspired a bit by the village's definition of inn. There's a nice parody there. Specifically in the document, an inn could include a restaurant of a modest size or a spa, but an inn would not include glamping or RVs or things like that. And an inn would not include a residential home development as part of it. An inn would be an inn. An inn would have specific architectural requirements, and the town would have a fair amount to say about what an inn looked like or didn't. Fourth, the definition of an inn would start around 20 rooms, and we would recommend giving the town some flexibility in two very important ways. One is we recognize that the town of Washington's density goes from the southwest to the northeast, and it is most dense in the southwest and gets increasingly less dense and as you move east, and as a consequence, one could see that in an overlay in Washington Hollow, perhaps 20 rooms is too small, and it could be, potentially 30 rooms. And in the village and around the village, perhaps 20 rooms is just right, since that's what the village has already got. And in Mabbittsville, because the mixed use area is so narrow, and because the aquifer is so important, and because there is already this concept of parity between commercial and residential development of 50-50, perhaps it's less than 20 rooms, 15, 10, something like that. Second concept is giving the town the capacity to work with a applicant and incent that applicant to do things that would improve the character of the town in lots of different ways and the quality of the inn. And as a consequence, perhaps be able to trade good deeds for a couple more rooms. If somebody wanted to buy 500 acres and turn it into a park, Forever Wild, in return for 5 or 10 more rooms, perhaps that could work. That kind of concept. But in no event could you get above a hard cap of around 50% of whatever the threshold actually is. So there's some flexibility, there's some capacity for the town to really work with things on the one hand, but there's also a sense that small means small at the end of the day. Last concept is around Airbnb. Last macro concept is around Airbnb. And what we would be recommending is that the town put a box around these Airbnbs, that there's a very clear permitting process, that permitting process involves people seeking permits, spending some money, that money is used to fund a clear oversight and enforcement of grievance process, so that the town really can understand what is going on in its midst. And there's also the sense, as a recommendation over the fullness of time, that the town might consider ultimately reaching the conclusion that the comprehensive plan, such as it is, and remote corporate ownership of many Airbnbs or short-term rentals might not be consistent, that they might threaten the nature of what makes our town special. But it seems premature to us to recommend that, because the town at the moment doesn't really even have a good box around the number of Airbnbs or an oversight model on them. So those are the macro recommendations. And maybe what we could do is see who on the committee would like to talk about some of those or their feelings. I can go around or I can just open it up. It might be more orderly given that we're in Zoom and the like to go around. And maybe I would start with you, Tim, because you're the first person in my box. Thoughts, comments on the macro, really anything. Please give us some content here.
Well, I thought it was very thorough. All along, I thought the process was extremely well done. And I think the final product reflects all of the efforts of the team and the consultants who did a marvelous job. I do not have any additions. I think it's a wonderful document.
Okay, so I think what I think it's useful to I think maybe we'll come back and ask you a couple of questions, Tim, in a second, but let's just keep going around. And Fernanda, you are next in my box. So thoughts, worries, considerations, things that have been on your mind as you've been reading this and parsing this.
Well, for the most part, I'm thinking it's a terrific document, and bravo to all. Where I get a little bit hung up, and I'm not quite sure that we have, and maybe it's just me, but I am not 100% sure that we've nailed the issues around the environment. We've talked about an environmental review, and there are some things that are already in place, but I'm not sure how it all works. I love the maps that have been created. Particularly love the view shed and buildable land map. I don't understand where I'm struggling is how to make all of that information actionable. How does the town take all of this information and put it to practical use? We've identified information about the environment. We've identified maps, but have we identified what we find is acceptable, what we find is correct for the environment? Have we created enough? We've created information, but have we created steps to make this information actionable when we're talking about hospitality, when we're talking about any new activity in our area, but our mission is hospitality. How do we relate that? So maybe can I toss that back to you, Nan? Have I rambled too much? I'm sorry.
No, I'm just trying to get my thoughts organized around that.
So my question is, have we addressed how to make it actionable?
Well, we might need to hit it more on the head. I think that kind of baked into the planning process is through site plan review, through special use permits, by doing the state environmental quality review, that when a project comes to the planning board and they have to, it goes through its normal analysis, the seeker process kind of forces the town to ask questions about You know, is there enough water? Is there enough parking? How does this impact the roads? How does this impact wildlife habitats? So I think just as part of having so part of the answer is, I think, having the maps and the information available to the planning board to use in their review and decision making is part of it. And maybe we didn't articulate it quite in those terms. It's kind of like baked into the whole process.
Mhm.
So yeah, go ahead, Michael. You got.
Dan, if I could, if I'm understanding your suggestion, Fernanda, is there a way that we can kind of draw a line and say, okay, if it's this situation, it's acceptable, but if it's this situation, it's not acceptable, or in this location, I think is what you might be getting at with
Yes,
regards to
some guidelines. We're suggesting some guidelines in other areas. And
Right.
maybe it's not for us to do that. Maybe it comes elsewhere.
Well, that's a good point. I think that Nan and I talked about, how to interpret some of these maps, and it does become a little bit of a 50 shades of gray issue because there's a lot of variables with the different natural resources, and maybe one person's proposal in this area, which has very little, relatively few natural resources that are sensitive. One person's proposal there might be fine. Another person's proposal there might not be, depending on what exactly they're proposing. So I think the maps that we developed were kind of a first pass at just generally kind of a Rorschach test of where you should and kind of try and avoid, and where you should maybe try and direct effort, because I think there's so many variables. But one of the things that we followed that up with is the option of doing a much more detailed natural resource inventory, which was one of our recommendations, because this was kind of a first pass one, and doing a more detailed one where the community can score, say, wetlands. How much do they value wetlands versus how much do they value, a specific habitat or another. And then I think you can get a lot more fine-grained information or in more detail. Obviously, we can't have that just yet because that process would take time. And I think you guys are very eager to kind of wrap this up and settle the direction of how are we going to handle hospitality. So maybe that's further down the line.
And I also might want to add is that is why I think that what you're getting at can at least be partly, so it's partly addressed by the normal review process that the planning board should be doing. But that is why I think it's really important that the town follows through to map an environmental protection overlay area. You have some good standards and you have some good guidelines in the zoning now that aren't really being able to take advantage of yet because you haven't actually created that overlay. You have the text for it, you have the guidelines for it, but you don't have the map. So I think at least in part, that environmental protection overlay with identifying certain features in certain locations with the standards that go along with how do you protect those, you have the framework of that in your zoning. You just have to follow through to to implement those fully. So I think that's all of those are part of the answer to that. But we could certainly look through it and strengthen how we use those tools. I mean, I don't think we have anything in there that really says, how can the maps that we made for you be used, which we certainly could do.
Well, and I would also offer kind of the next step in all of this process, or the next logical phase of this, is if the town did wish to pursue the idea of developing these overlays, that would be a process of sitting down and figuring out, well, where makes the most sense? Where would we draw the boundaries of these overlays? And I think that process would have to include a a consideration of where these resources are that we mapped and what makes sense. And I think if everybody agrees on the location for these overlays, that would give you a much more hard and fast rule of, okay, it's okay within this area, but it's not okay outside that area. Would that help?
I think so.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Tim, you're muted.
That makes it hard, doesn't it? As I laid out the agenda, the last point I think is, okay, where do we go from here? Right. And Michael, you just alluded a little bit to that. And I do think it relates, Fernanda, to your question, right? Were we as a committee to agree on these recommendations, then we would send them to the town board, and the town board would then have a bunch of decisions to make and about, does it like these recommendations? Does it want to follow them? And if so, how would it want to go about that? I do think we should talk a little bit about, as we are sending these recommendations to them, if we recommend, in addition to the recommendations, some next steps. And I think we can hold off on that until that last section of the evening. But certainly we can control this document. And I think, Fernanda, if you're reading this and you're coming away not crystal clear about these maps, then I think we should make sure that the document is crystal clear about two things. We've used these maps to help us reach the conclusion where overlays may or may not be appropriate. All right, so that's why we generated all of these. And secondly, we recommend affirmatively that they use these maps if they are going to refine these overlays, to Michael's point. I think if we could make that crystal clear and draw that line, that might help.
I like that idea very much. That's taking these maps and making them actionable, giving them a real purpose.
Okay, so let me just look around to the rest of the committee. Any objections to that kind of addition to this document? I'm taking silence as no objections. I love that. Okay, so we're going to keep on moving. Anything else, Fernanda, before we go to the next person? That was a meaty topic. Anything else?
No, thank you, other than a commendation to Nan and her group for a wonderful document.
Okay, let's go to Claudia. You and Margaret are on my next box, and you're on the left side of my box. So, left goes first for me.
No, I want to thank Nan and Michael and their team for putting this all together. I think they've done a fantastic job. And, I'm going to go back to what Timmy Bonacue said. I think it's well done. I think we presented what we've been asked, and I'm good with everything.
Okay. May come back to you with some questions in a second, but just to keep going around the horn. Margaret.
Well, thank you. I want to also commend Nan and Michael and team. And I'd really like to thank the community, because none of this would really make sense if they hadn't had their input. The only thing I want to say to follow up on Fernanda's concerns on the environment, the CAC is going to be doing a natural resource inventory for the town as well as a part of the climate smart community. So we are working on that. So it will be something that is being done as fast as possible, but it's a little slow, unfortunately. But in that, part of what I would like to see with our recommendation is either adding phases or a stage to see if hospitality works in one place before it rushing into doing too many inns and excuse me, several of them failing, for instance. So those are my only comments.
Okay, so let's tease that out. I'm excited by that comment, Margaret. Well, first of all, I'm glad that you're able to inform us a little bit about what the CAC is up to, and I know it's up to a lot. So that was helpful, and I'm grateful for your service on that. And then on the idea of staging, can we flesh that out just a little bit more? Would you say, how might that work? I guess in your mind.
Well, if all of our data shows that our number one recommendation for the locations of hospitality, Washington Hollow was by far the most important location. And you have a commercial property sitting there that could easily be converted back to restored to what it was. It's in a good location. And I think it would fit the town the best as an example of where to start. We would either know, yep, everybody wants to come and stay here, or no, it's not going to work out quite like that.
So, so I guess what you would say is as part of our recommendations, we recommend that the town be vigilant and not embrace too many inns all at the same time, but do a little bit of gradualism on that. Is that the recommendation?
Yes, that is basically what I'm saying.
Tim, if I could build
Yes,
on
Michael.
that, I think that's an interesting idea, especially in consideration of, the other area that was discussed is really the immediate vicinity around the village. And that's not very well defined, other than our caveat that it would have to be in areas that have a very, a relatively low sensitivity as far as natural resources. Our other recommendation, and I think it's one of our bigger ones, is that we feel that to be true to what the community said in 2015 and the community said today, folks still feel that the village really should be kind of the center of commercial activity. And so if there's any way we can accommodate some of this new hospitality growth in the village, we think that the town and the village should try and sit down and roll up their sleeves, if you will, and take a look at their zoning and are there ways that they could accommodate some of this growth also for the benefit of both the town and the village together. So to Margaret's point about phasing, perhaps the phasing of any of those areas immediately outside the village should really be informed by what comes out of that conversation with the town and the village, and in doing that discussion, what areas of the village make sense. So maybe that's where we wouldn't want to have an area just outside the village that we're recommending for hospitality when just inside the village we're not. But maybe it would make sense if there's an area inside the village that makes sense, then maybe that would behoove itself to, be just outside the village, or let that discussion inform what areas at the, the periphery of the village make sense. Did that make sense?
Maybe. So the village already allows for an inn up to 20 rooms. So that's a little, that's already in there.
Right, but they and Nan could probably speak to this a little bit more because I think Nan looked at the zoning in more detail than I did. That it's limited to certain areas. There's lots of areas of the village that don't allow that sort of. So there's what we're hinting at is that there's room to there's more room there than you might think. There's room at the end.
All right. So that makes more sense now. Thanks.
Well, Nan, do you have any objections to what we're talking about here about the idea of just recommending that the town approach this gradually, or just
I guess I don't have any objections to it other than I would want there to be a policy. Even if you don't attain, like say, both Washington Hollow and some area outside the village, even if you ultimately don't attain that, what I think is really important is that we don't phase it in a way that gives the impression that all these overlay areas can be set up anywhere over the town. We want to have a clear policy that really directs these to these specific locations. So if you want to phase it, fine. I don't necessarily think that's an issue. And I agree with Michael that I really do think it's really important for the town and the village to look at it as a whole, as you have. But I guess what I think is really important and what the public input that we heard is that the community does not feel, and nor are there environmental conditions appropriate for housing or hospitality overlays everywhere. So as long as there's a policy in the comprehensive plan that clearly identifies, where you want them, and if it takes you X number of years or X number of phases or stages to get there, that's fine. I just don't want it to be seen as an open-ended thing everywhere.
Mhm.
right.
Nan, are you able to tell us where in the village they allow the 20 rooms? Where is that specifically?
I could look it up while we're talking. I don't remember offhand.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Buffy, as our duly serving member who speaks for authority in the village, the concept of coordination between the village and the town, does that strike you as practical? And one of the things we've got to do is make sure that we hand recommendations that are practical, that one can actually govern under. And since you're in that place, does that strike you as practical or not? Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry. I definitely think it's practical that the town and the village can work together and sort of find ways and places that they both think are appropriate for hospitality, to update the comprehensive plan. It's, we work together on all kinds of things, and I think this is one of them. There's already the village already defines inns, so I think that's a good thing. It is limited on where the inns can go, but maybe there's some opportunity to expand that within the village. That would have to be a discussion as well. I will say that going back to what Fernando was talking about, you know, in regards to the environmental aspect of this whole thing, you know, the word overlay is what sort of got us here. So I think we have to be very clear, like what Nan was saying, to make sure that the town goes back and really puts in place the overlay districts of where they think it's best, you know, hospitality is best suited. So I think Fernanda sort of hit on that, and so did Nan, which was good.
Okay,
Tim, just let me interrupt just to answer the question. So there's three, Michael put up the village's zoning map. The three areas where inns are allowed is the residential multifamily district and the general business district and the Bennett College district.
So essentially, if you guys can hear me, it's the red, deep red area, the brownish orange area, and then the Thorn building is, oops, sorry, right here. So I mean, it's limited to, can I draw on this? No, I can't. But I'll zoom in a little bit. So it's limited to this red area, this orange area, and where the Thorn building is right now. So as a total percentage of, you know, village area, it's very small. You know, it would have to be a discussion with the village, what areas outside of that central core would make sense.
And I think there are some locations outside that core area that do make sense.
Right. I don't want to say what they are because, you know,
I mean, yeah.
the village didn't hire us, so they have to.
No, yeah. But there are some of those definitely that would be great for hospitality. But again, that's another discussion for the village.
And I agree with you, Buffy, that in the context of what's happened in Washington, that the word overlay, as you said, did get you where you are here, but
it's a trigger word.
yeah, I get that it's a trigger word. I understand that. And we can go into, you know, a larger discussion of that, but we maybe didn't get it enough, but we did try to explain why an overlay developed by the town with town developed standards and rules in that overlay to allow for inns. It's a very narrow use that would be defined with, you know, box it in and define what the development rules and standards are, is, you know, you effectively use overlays in the town zoning for other things, the aquifer protection overlay, the ag protection overlay, and so forth. So it's certainly not a concept that is, you know, out in left field somewhere. And I think maybe the difference is that the town is defining this rather than someone else defining it for the town.
Right.
So yes, you know, an overlay is an overlay. It is another district that would sit on top of the base district, but this would be a very focused kind of overlay for the things that we're recommending that there be specific policy. You know, they're set up specifically to address certain policies that the town would establish in an updated plan for those, just for those areas.
Right. I think that's what I like what you said, is that is one of the things that you're really recommending is the town come together and make sure that they really define those overlay districts, which I think is important to a lot of people. So I think that's great. But overall, I think you guys have done an amazing job. Again, I commend you and your team. It's been wonderful to work with you, and I really feel good about the work that we've done, and thank you.
Okay, so to recap how we've gone so far, we've got drawing a little bit straighter line on the environmental front, per Fernanda. We've got putting a recommendation that the town be vigilant on the pace, per Margaret. We've got, I think, we ought to include this map for the village in here. Just so it's there for posterity, for everybody's, ease to find it. And the
Right,
idea,
Tim, do you mean the Village of Millbrook zoning?
yes, thank you. As an appendix, when we are talking about recommending that the village and the town maybe coordinate a bit, and that far be it from us to suggest that the village might be able to want to look at its areas for hospitality in coordination with the town as the town is doing it. I think incumbent on what everybody has said, I think there's maybe a fourth comment, which is we ought to take at least a stab of putting a crayon on a map and saying where we think the overlay should be in Washington Hollow and around the village, just so that the town has a starting point. It's not going to be the right answer, but that at least we put some kind of starting point rather than just leaving it so amorphous. And we don't have to do it in Mabbittsville because Mabbittsville has already got the mixed use area, and we're recommending staying within that. We're not recommending changing that. So Margaret, I want to make sure you were finished with some of your thoughts and comments. They were so good that they created a lot of conversation, but I just want to cycle back to you and make sure that you had said your piece.
I think I have. I don't know if there's anything else to add to it. I think you've covered everything after.
Okay. And Buffy, I think you've said your piece as well. Let me just cycle back to the last macro point, which none of us have talked about, which was the short-term rentals. And just make sure, and maybe I'll just go in reverse order. Buffy, are you good with where we're coming out on short-term rentals, or any concerns?
No, I'm good. I think that what they've laid out is just what people wanted, the feedback that we got from the survey, and I think it's a good starting point for the town and the village to move forward on setting some standards and policies in regards to that.
Okay. Margaret?
With Buffy.
So you agree with Buffy?
Yep. I
Okay.
agree.
Claudia?
I agree with Buffy and Margaret. Living in the village, I like that there's a step here that we've laid out.
Yeah. I think it's a really important step. So I'm excited about that as well. Fernanda, going in reverse order.
Well, I guess my first comment is, we have no standards right now. So any one of the recommendations is a step forward. I think all of our recommendations are great. So I'm enthusiastic that we have given the town something really good to work with, because as I said, we have nothing now, and it's only going to get better if the town uses our recommendations.
Yeah, well said. Timmy?
I think it was so well said, it doesn't deserve any further comment from me.
Okay.
I really, Fernanda, that was well said. I concur.
Okay. All right. So I think that's the macro piece. You know, I did do a long and quiet read, and I had some wordsmithing. And I don't know if other people did as well. Most of them are sort of small points, which I could just do in writing, Nan, to you guys, but just so everybody understands, you know, for example, making sure that we actually use the defined term in with a capitalized I in all locations. Sometimes we don't, you know, that kind of really small stuff. I thought your summary, your kickoff summary statement is great. I'm so glad we have that. I agree with the need for it, right? Because it's you know, what can happen is one can get right down into the weeds and sort of say, well, what are we doing here, right? So one of the and I think by and large it really works. I think the only place that's a little fuzzy that we could work on getting a bit crisper is around the definition of rooms for an inn, where we're talking about having the town board and somebody just came into the room and distracted me. I apologize. So the notion of okay, it's a definition of a room, an inn is 20 rooms, and there are these two concepts. One being perhaps in Washington Hollow, it could be slightly more because it's a more dense area, and perhaps in Abbotsville it's less because of the environmental concerns. That's concept one, and then concept two is perhaps an applicant can take advantage of some incentives to get some bonus rooms if they do good works. I think that we define that a little bit better in the detail than we do in the summary, and we mush them together. So my recommendation would be that we just work on that sentence a little bit, not to change the concept, but just to make the concept a little bit clearer. And in particular, I might actually use the word, you're using the word density incentives or density bonus system right now. And I might, for the incentives, and I think the uh, uh, we might actually use that for the sliding scale, right? Like, so the sliding scale is relating to density in Washington Hollow versus, say, Mabbittsville, and the bonus system is really an incentive bonus system. So just a little bit making it clear one way or the other, and we could take that offline, but it's not changing the concept. I had one question, which was a little bit about events, and are we clear enough as a group about the definition of inn? Do we expect these inns to be a big wedding, being able to host big weddings or not? I've noticed in our town and in surrounding towns, there's been a lot of scrutiny around wedding halls, for example. So I just asked you and the committee, are we clear enough around the definition of events?
Are you asking me or are you asking the committee first?
Well, why don't we start with you and then see if the committee is with you?
Well, Michael's highlighted event facility. I'd have to find, and maybe Michael, you would know what page it was on, but we also discussed somewhere else that when you have your regulations for whether it's an inn and the short-term rental, you need to articulate what other accessory or other uses would go along with it. And that there is something in there in the recommendations about that, that talks about that events was something that was in the survey and in the open house information that was talk about. Those were, how people feel about them. As a planner, my preference is that an event facility is different than an inn, and that is different than a short-term rental, and that if someone wants to have a short-term rental or an inn that also has events, that needs to be articulated in the definition in the zoning. If it's not, if that's not clear, or if that's not the policy that you want, yeah, we probably could. We alluded to that if we didn't hit it on the head yet. So I think you guys need to articulate how you want to handle that.
The intent here is that we have the ability to say inns are allowed in this area. Let's say Washington Hollow, for example, inns are allowed in this area. And as an accessory use to those, then, a bar might be permitted, or a restaurant might be permitted, or an event facility might be permitted. But you also have the ability to say, maybe we feel an event facility, weddings and so forth at an inn in Washington Hollow. Maybe it doesn't work there, or it does, but in Mabbittsville, maybe we want to do it differently. So you can, I guess, fine tune, adjust this to say, we want inns with these accessory uses here, and we want inns with only these accessory uses here. And I think in this context, we would be using event facility, for weddings and parties. That would be an accessory use.
Does the committee, I feel like the way this committee could lose credibility is if it imposes its own opinions on things, right? And so I think we've got to really be data driven by listening to what the community said to us and trying to parse through that and find the common ground. I feel like the community was reasonably reserved about size and scale. and was willing to have a restaurant or a spa type piece, but that it was a reasonably small footprint. I think many weddings end up being 200, 300, 400 people, and that could change the nature of it. So I think it's a little bit like the glamping RV piece. I think we would be on very firm ground if we did not have, wedding events as, part of the definition of inns. But I throw that out to others because if people think I'm going too far out on a limb on that, then I will scurry right back to the tree and hug the trunk really fast.
So I'm
Don't
just-
everybody?
Yeah, I just, from the survey point of view, we specifically asked the question about what accessory uses would be allowed as part of a new hospitality venue. And the information for hosted events was 11% strongly opposed, 10% opposed, 25% were neutral, 38% supported, and 16% strongly supported.
It's one of those things that's easier understood in a graphic.
Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, do you want me to try and pull that up on my screen or?
I mean, I guess I'm not trying to, I don't, it didn't say, I mean, look, for example, I've been thinking about, we have the Thorn building coming in, and clearly that is one of the uses of the Thorn building is going to be as a potential wedding venue, right? Look, I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure what you're saying. I don't think we asked specifically on the survey, do you want wedding events? Right?
No, we asked, the question was, would you want any of the following on-site accessory uses or facilities to be allowed as part of a new hospitality venue?
Right. We didn't say wedding.
Actually, we said hosted events, parentheses, weddings, parties, conferences, etc.
All right. So I stand corrected. So we said wedding, and you're saying that it was all over the map, and therefore I'm too far out on a limb. It's not definitive enough to make the recommendation that we're careful about weddings.
Well, I think,
Don't you think we have to look at that sort of like on an individual basis with people like, for instance, in Washington Hollow with so many rooms and so forth, they may be able to do some type of weddings and events and so forth. But again, going out to Mabbittsville, that may not be the case because of the environmental issues and so forth. So maybe it has to be on an individual basis as it comes to the board for approval,
Okay.
that we
All
have
right.
some type of guidelines in there.
Okay. I'm getting it. I think that makes sense. I think maybe what we just simply say is that we really recommend that the town is sensitive to that issue, and that what could happen is you could end up having unintentional density in a pretty small place, right? That's all I'm worried about is somebody creates, one of the things we're quite clear about is don't create an inn as a sort of a way of doing a residential development, right? Don't create an inn as doing like a huge wedding venue, right? Like that's all I'm trying.
Right.
Yeah.
and I think that what you're saying is right, is that having a wedding at an inn as a secondary use, you know, someone has a backyard wedding in a 4 or 10 room inn, is very different than an event space whose primary commercial use is to have parties Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday, or whatever. You know, typically, at least in some of the other work that I do, event spaces as the primary use are regulated by themselves separately, that have a set of rules and regulations for that event space. So I think, and maybe we have to go back and read the recommendation that we wrote, but I think it is important for the town to make to distinguish between an inn that has a secondary use as events versus an event space whose primary goal is to have parties and weddings. So I think we can, you know, I think.
Yeah, if you could tease that out, that would make me much more comfortable.
Yeah.
And-
Sorry if I didn't make it clear, but I in going through this work, I wasn't imagining proposing an event space as a standalone primary use.
Right.
Yeah, that wasn't my intention. I've always thought of these as secondary, you know, accessory uses to, you know, an inn.
Okay. All right. So
Tim, Tim,
that's basically
sorry, Tim, I have
the
a question, or Nan, Tim.
yes, Mark.
No,
It's
it's
Claudia.
Claudia.
Claudia, sorry, Claudia.
In here, we have an event facility could be defined as an indoor or outdoor space typically rented for not more than 1 day period for the purposes of hosting a special event such as a wedding, reception, private party, and so on. Are we going to keep that to 1 day? Are we going to narrow that right down to 1 day?
Well, just so we're clear, I think that is the existing, that's a definition of events. I'm not so sure that actually is in the definition of, and it's one of the things I guess I was trying to clarify is the definition of inn. You know, how the definition of inn ties to the definition of events, right?
So maybe the definition for the inn should be expanded, that an inn could have accessory uses such as a restaurant or a bar or limited event capacity or something, whatever the words would be. Is that what you're looking for?
Yeah, I'm just looking, and I totally agree with Buffy's point that some of this relates back to the density piece, right? So, you know, one could envision in Washington Hollow, if one has, you know, an inn with X number of rooms, that, you know, maybe you could host a small wedding there. I'm tracking with that, with what Buffy says about that. But I just think in general, we're trying to say to the town, look, we've listened to the community. The community is willing to have inns, and in fact would like to have inns, not just willing, would actually actively like to have an inn. But it's a very tight definition of what an inn is. And we're not, and the community is not interested in people using an inn for ulterior motives, like doing a residential development or doing an event, a place or whatever. We just have to be quite clear to the town about that. That's all.
Sorry, if I may, I wasn't sure if it was Margaret or Claudia that questioned the 1 day, not more than 1 day duration on the event facility. What was your concern about that?
No, just that it was defined in here. It just says that it's defined as an indoor space. If we're, you know, you said you were wordsmithing and we were trying to just clarify, that's all, because in here we have it as a 1 day facility.
Okay, so I think there's 2 points on that, and Claudia, we couldn't hear you all that well, but I think we did hear you, which is to say, you're basically asking us to be quite certain that we like the definition of event facility in here,
Yeah.
right?
You're saying, yeah,
And I'm asking that we're clear about the difference between event facility and inn and how they interact.
I would recommend to give you, I mean, unless you think otherwise, to give you some flexibility, that the definition for the inn would say the inn may include accessory uses such as bar, restaurant, and so forth. But it doesn't have to, in the sense that if you wish to preclude or not permit, say, an event facility as part of an inn in one area of town because it would be not appropriate, then you have that flexibility.
Yeah, I think we would go beyond that. I think we would be saying that we recommend that the town be quite vigilant about events, space.
You want a clear distinction between an inn and an event space, and I think
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to get to.
Yeah, and I think that, from a zoning perspective, an accessory use, yes, I get it. I don't know the exact wording. I'd have to think through the exact wording on how to approach that, but I think I do understand what you're trying to do.
And perhaps it would help if I would revise that slightly, instead of calling it an event facility, which might imply a standalone structure, that it would be maybe perhaps event space or something to that effect.
Okay. Those were the big wordsmiths that I have. All right. Anybody else have any wordsmiths that they want to get it out right now? Okay. So I think then we get to the last section of the agenda, which is the what do we do now section, right? I guess a recommendation to the committee would be the following, that we have Nan and Michael do one final turn. But that's just essentially wordsmithing. I think that we as a committee unanimously would recommend that we send this to the town board, and that perhaps what we do is a letter that goes on top of it, that I'm just being told that we have a hard stop maybe at 9, which is great. We'll get out before 9 on the Zoom. That we as a committee have worked with Anand and team, and we recommend this document for their consideration. I think that is the bare minimum of what we would do. I think we might go one step further and make a suggestion to the town board that if they reach the conclusion that they wanted to embrace our recommendations, that they consider engaging Nan and team to help with phase two, which would be the specific drafting of the language that would be changed in the comprehensive plan. That's a little bit forward of us as a committee. And I don't want to overstep our bounds, quite frankly, but there is a practical consideration that's going on in the back of my head, which is who better to actually come up with some of the specific language than the group that did all the work so far to come to the recommendation. So let me just stop for a second and see if anybody, Fernanda's waving her hand. Fernanda, please.
I would like to maybe also propose that not just sending the report, but offering a presentation and for Nan to be available to present to the board. Because walking through it with Nan and team, I think could be very helpful. So they're just not reading it, in the middle of the night.
Excellent concept. So we would send it and offer. It's so easy for us to offer Nan and team. So we would, but I think that's a great idea. Not just offer, but actually just schedule. We'd like to schedule a meeting for you to have a chance to have Nan walk you through all this.
And,
Okay.
and then once they do that, it becomes almost it's a non-issue. Of course, they're going to want Nan and team to do to help with the wording, but this allows a proper introduction. They can see Nan and team in action.
Yeah, I
Okay.
think that, they have to have some information about what we did and why and what we found, but, ultimately the decision about how they're going to use this and what they want to do with it, that they're going to have a process to think about that and make a decision.
I could be wrong, but it may be necessary, to Tim's point, that we clarify to the town board that there is a separate phase two on the table that we haven't reached yet, because I don't know that that was outlined in the, I just looked, I don't think that that was outlined in the RFP. I think that was something that we proposed. Am I correct?
No, but they are where they have seen that. They've seen the agreement, but
Okay.
it doesn't matter. I think it is important for us to simply say, we'd like to, we're going to schedule a meeting with you where we're going to present this to you. That's number one. And number two, to the extent, we would like to remind you that to the extent that you want to proceed with any of this, there is a phase two that was contemplated in the original process. I think that's fair, Michael. So we could, repetition makes for clarity. So that's fine. So now let me just go over to Margaret and Claudia. Any comment on this?
Oh, no, I'm good. I'm good. Margaret's saying she's good too. I don't know if you can hear her.
Okay.
I'm talking to the mics. Can you hear us?
Okay. Yeah. We do. So got it. And Buffy?
All good.
And I'm not sure if Timmy is still there or not. I think he may have just stepped away. I saw him there a second ago.
No, he's there.
I'm still here.
Okay. Are you good?
Yes, I am.
Okay. All right. So I think we have a clear set of next steps, it would be very much against tradition if we did not open up and ask Howard if he has any questions or the like.
Yes, I do. Thank you for the opportunity. First of all, I'm very impressed with the environmental leaning that you would do the wetlands and the inventory and so on, because that's the one thing, if you lose, you'll never get back. And so this is really important to always be on top of that. The second thing, I was impressed with Margaret's suggestion to start with segments. And I think if the Cottonwood Inn section succeeds, it would be a good sign. If it doesn't succeed, it would have prevented you from putting in other sections in there that would have infrastructure and buildings that now would have to figure out what to do with themselves. Because once you put those in, you're kind of stuck with them forever. They never go away. So I liked Margaret's suggestion very much. I've always thought the Cottonwood Inn was the best place for the town to try this out because it's pre-existing, it has a history, and you have backers who are interested in promoting it further. I was not so sure about events. Why would you want to put events in a town that wants to stay small and somewhat rural and start attracting bigger weddings and so on to come in here? I don't think that's needed at this point in time. I think, again, that would go along with wait and see how it starts. Start small. If that works, then go a little bigger. So if eventually hospitality really takes off, then that would be the place where you would add the events like the weddings and so on as a place to figure out where they go. And the other thing I was a little concerned about was the Airbnbs. You hear stories about towns being overtaken by them where people who don't live there have black sections of the town when they close them down for the winter season or wherever. And instead, I would like to see people who have Airbnbs live there full time so that they're residents. And finally, I'm concerned with the point that somebody raised that Airbnbs take away from people who want permanent housing here. I personally, for one, would like to see neighbors as opposed to people who don't live in my area. So I would like to see the Airbnbs at least have people who live there full time. And I would not like to see some of these bigger corporations, like I heard at the town board meeting, buying up some of these areas for people who don't want to live here at all, but they see it as an economic opportunity. So all in all, I think, you did a good job. It's always a give and take a little bit, but I think you managed to sort of bridge that gap. So I'm happy with what you've done for the most part with my comments.
So, Howard, first of all, we appreciate your unblemished record of attending every meeting, and so we're grateful to that. And I think that we share your sensitivity around the Airbnb piece. We just didn't feel that our work supported an outright ban yet on remote corporate ownership of Airbnbs. And so what this document will have is a process by which we can be quite clear how many Airbnbs we have, real oversight, and a recommendation that the town really monitor this issue for just the points that you're talking about. So I think there'll be plenty more opportunity for you to express that point of view and opinion. And as it relates to the other comments, I appreciate them. Obviously, I worry about events as well. So with that, let me just ask anybody else who's on. I see there's still a group that has been quite patient and loyal listening here. Does anybody else have any questions that they'd like to ask? Oh, okay. I will take that as a no. All right. Adelaide.
Hi, so sorry. I got in there a little late. This has been wonderful, such an excellent process to watch you guys go through, and I'm very impressed. I just had a couple of questions, and the most important one was about overlay districts. I thought Fernanda's comments were really excellent about protecting the environment and making very clear recommendations, very specific recommendations as to process. But I wanted to ask Nan to address a little bit about overlay districts. As Buffy said, this is sort of how we got here. I am not familiar enough with zoning to know how useful or common they are as a tool. So I know that might be a bigger question than you want to do now, but if you could give me a quick view of overlay districts and if they're considered best practice.
They're very common. They're used in multiple situations, from historic districts to scenic overlays, and specifically for this use. So yes, they're not a new thing. They're not something off in left field somewhere. They're long history of use of overlays, and it's basically take your base zoning district and put a second set of standards on top of that to address a specific topic, whether it be an environmental protection overlay, or a historic district overlay, or an inn overlay, that it lays out specific standards just for that use, and it's kind of plopping it on top of the base district, saying, we're going to let you do these things in this way in this area. So that's they're very common, and I recommend them in most places I go to get at specific issues that a community may be needing to address in specific locations.
I agree with everything Nan just said.
Adelaide, I think from the committee's perspective, there's the old adage of just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get you. And one has to be very careful about unintended consequences associated with overlays, which is why I'd like to be very specific about the map area that we're thinking about, at least as a starting point, and why I think we have to be so specific about room count, architectural piece, all of the things that Nan's been talking about. Really good question, and I think Nan, and Michael, it would be helpful in maybe to have as an appendix a little primer on overlays, because I do think that Adelaide's question is going to be a common one for people.
Right. I just want to say, thank you, Tim. It is a trigger point, given what we went through. I also remember many attorneys in recent controversies saying that to avoid them, overlay districts, and that they were it seemed like the implication was they could be easily abused. I mean, what I heard planners say about other situations where they were being abused, I thought. So that was my only point.
Well, I think that, there are techniques like plan development districts that are wide open. It's just basically tell us what you want to do and we'll negotiate a direction. I don't see overlay districts functioning that way at all. These are not open-ended kinds of things. They're just an opportunity to address a specific need, whether it be an environmental need. We also have ridgeline overlay protection districts that get at ridgeline. So this is one that's getting at one particular topic that would be determined by the town through the town board. It's not an applicant generated request. The fact is that anyone anytime can request a zoning change, whether it be to the base zoning or to an overlay, and we can't really stop that. But the town can make its own decisions about the direction it wants to go for these, and that's what I'm advocating.
I think if we clarify in the comprehensive plan that this overlay that we're proposing is only suitable in, these 2 or 3 areas, then and make it very clear, then I think that the abuse that you're worried about, Adelaide, wouldn't shouldn't, I should say, be an issue.
Right, right. And then that goes back to Fernanda's point that in terms of making environmental issues a priority, making them clear, and just having, having been here a long time and seeing a lot of the history, a lot of that is cultural on the board, right? And it's all a perspective. So your board is either environmentally protective or not. And ultimately, that's becomes down to a political question. I mean, I had an environmental lawyer that told me that the people that protect the environment are the people that are actually, making it's a matter of political change when it comes down to really getting it protected. So to the extent you can make it specific, obviously that's really good. It's just that you have to have a board that's going to really be behind it and not just say they are.
Well, look, Adelaide, I'm super appreciative. I know how attentive you have been, and these are good, rich comments and context for everybody. What I need to do is wrap it up because we're actually going to lose our Zoom link here. What I want to do is just ask the committee if anybody has a issue with us drafting a letter, which obviously everybody will get a chance to see, which would go to on top of this document to the town board. Any problems with that? Okay.
No.
I would like to thank the entire committee, but I would particularly like to thank Margaret, who has worked double time in lots of different ways. And Margaret, I think we're all quite grateful. It's not lost on us how diligent you have been. And thank you. So with that, let's call this meeting to a close. Nan and Michael, I speak for the committee in saying we've really actually enjoyed working with you just immensely. So thank you for taking us on and making a unpleasant task so much fun. Thank you. So with that, good night all, and we will wish you a happy 4th of July.
Thanks. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Happy 4th.
Enjoy.
Thank you.